The text that we heard from Romans this morning is a solidly Lutheran text that starts out talking about how we are justified by faith. I love the word justification. In our modern legal system, you can think about being acquitted, which means you're innocent, or being guilty, which means you're going to be punished because you were in the wrong. Justification kind of sits in the middle of that and says, you are guilty, but you're not going to be punished. And it is the word that we talk about when we say that Jesus comes and finds us as sinful people, and though we are guilty of that, frees us from that sin and gives us new life to live. Now, after Paul says that we are justified by faith, he then goes on to say that we ought to boast in what? Our sufferings, because suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. So he follows through this track of suffering. We boast in our sufferings, not in the other things that we're good at, but we boast in our sufferings, which produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. Now, suffering comes in all kinds of ways that are very serious. I'm going to focus a little bit as just an example of a kind of minor suffering on the week that I just spent at camp with a bunch of kids. Because if you were to dig into it, you would see that there was a fair bit of little bits of suffering that they all went through this week for lots of different reasons. For some of them, it is that they are very picky eaters. And this camp that we went to is up on a mountain, and we eat lunch every day if you eat with the kids out in the woods. My favorite meal is grilled cheese and tomato soup in the woods, cooked on a griddle over a fire. But that's the lunch meals. They eat dinner and they eat breakfast in the lodge. There is no sugar, there are no snacks, there are no soda, right? And so some of these kids are picky eater, and if you're a picky eater, and that's the food that's put in front of you, you gotta wrestle with that a little bit. And early in the week, you could see like one of the girls had an apple for breakfast and a little bit of a salad for lunch. Now, mind you, let me back up a little bit. Most days I don't walk very far. Last week I hiked like 30 miles. And all of the kids do too. So you got these kids who have gone from 0, some of them, to 5 to 6 miles a day, much of it uphill, and they're eating an apple and a salad because they're picky. So there's some suffering that goes along with these kids, and you can see them looking at the food choice just going, oh, I really don't want to eat peanut butter that's not made with peanuts. That's soy butter, and that's a funny texture, and I don't want to eat that. And then later in the afternoon, after you hiked up a mountain, say, I'm hungry. Well, of course you're hungry. You're burning all kinds of calories, and the food that you didn't want to eat was the food that was put in front of you. So there's that kind of little bit of suffering that goes on. There's also emotional suffering. We rode up with 2 kids from another congregation that did not know our kids, and they were kind of in the middle of the van as like a little island, and it's hard for middle school kids to bridge those gaps right away. And so there's that kind of new people, what do? I don't know if I know these people kind of suffering that goes on. And then you get to camp. There was a girl from another group that cried, I think, for the first 3 days all day. Super, super homesick, begging to go home. And then she knew one of the adults was going home, and it was like, just take me with you. And that's another kind of suffering that goes on, right? It's emotional. Then there's the physical side of the suffering. Every time I go now, I'm trying to figure out how many more years I'm going to be able to keep up with teenagers hiking straight uphill and climbing over rocks. This time I went on the creek hike, the creek walk. I didn't do this last year. And they call it the creek walk. So I envisioned this broad stream, maybe ankle deep, that were just nice flowing waters. I don't know why I pictured that, because the whole place is a mountain. It really should be called a rigorous creek climb, because you are constantly climbing over slimy rocks and stepping on wobbly rocks. The water is ice cold, which for the kids is one thing. For me, it was like having like an ice bath on my 43-year-old knees. It felt fantastic. But much of it is very hard, right? Kids are falling down. Every time you go, there's a kid in a sling somewhere or twisted their ankle, because it is physically rigorous thing. And when you aren't physically active like that and you go do that, it hurts. So there's some suffering that goes along with it. And when you roll all of that together into the activities we do, it gets difficult. One of the days we had a high ropes thing. We had to climb this rope ladder. Not every kid makes it up that. And so for the kid that doesn't make it up when everybody else did, there's, that disappointment. And so some won't even try. And then some of them are terrified of it. And one kid cried up at the top and just stood up there, and it was in a different group, so I didn't see it, but he just got to the top and just cried and just stood there. And they had to coax him to get him off now of this thing that he has climbed up. So that's more of this suffering. Then you hike up these mountains, and one of the days you do this hike up to a peak. There's 2 different peaks. Last year we had a really good day. We made it all the way up to the one peak. You can see the whole valley. You're in North Carolina. They say you can see Tennessee because of all the mountains. And if you're having a good day, you hike across the ridge and go up the other peak that's called Pinnacle. And last year we had a good day. We didn't have any injuries. We didn't have any weather problems. We did the whole thing. We did run out of water, but which was hard. Another group last year didn't make it. One of the girls sprained her ankle on the way up. So now they had to turn around and help her all the way down. And they didn't make it to the peak. And her brother all week kept reminding us that last year it was his sister's fault that they didn't make it up to that peak. And so there's still, there's some anxiety and struggle that goes with this. And so this year we made it, and we were not moving fast, because it's hard going straight uphill. And we had some issues. But by the time we finally got to the peak, it was amazing that you could see the clouds. And then the storm rolled in, and on the radio they said, there's going to be a thunderstorm, get down off the mountain. So we start down the mountain, and it starts to rain. And one of the kids with us who was kind of tagging toward the back, moving kind of slow, said, I never get to experience rain like this. This is fantastic. And I looked at the counselor with us, and I said, it doesn't rain like this in Florida. In Florida, it comes down so hard, it's just total torrential downpour. 10 minutes later, it was a torrential downpour, and I looked at him and said, this is how it rains in Florida. But going down a mountain where it's cold up in the mountains and you're soaking wet and you're trying to make sure, now you got to spread the kids out because lightning's getting closer and it's kind of scary for some of them. This is hard stuff, and there's a bit of suffering in there. And in this week, you got to kind of see all of this microcosm of humanity with kids that are struggling with things they don't like, struggling with emotional stuff, struggling with physical stuff, and it's tough. And I was reflecting on this text the whole week, right? So I knew this was coming, Sunday was coming, I always know Sunday's coming. And I had read this text, and I was thinking about suffering that produces endurance, and endurance that produces character, and character that produces hope. And as I saw these kids struggling with all of these things, I thought there's a simple way not to have to struggle. Just don't go. Don't go to camp. And I go to Camp Result. I don't have to do any of that stuff. We just get them for a couple hours a day. I don't have to hike up the mountain. I don't have to go on the creek walk. It would be very easy for me to drive a van up to the lodge, minimize the hiking I have to do, sit around and relax all the rest of the day, and avoid all of that suffering. Now, as this text goes on, Paul starts to get into what it is that Jesus did. So he says, suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces. Well, then Paul says, while we were still weak. What does he mean by weak? Well, he had just said that suffering produces endurance, which produces character, which produces hope. I think what he means is while we were still avoiding suffering, while we were still trying not to suffer, which meant we didn't gain any endurance in that suffering, which means we end up without the character that we could have, which means we lack a little bit of hope. And if you look at our culture, do we embrace suffering? Not even close. And if you think about the categories that the kids have to wrestle with, there's foods they don't like, right, when they get to camp. There's plenty of newness that we can experience in the world. Some of it comes from being around people that are different from us. Some of it comes from new communities that we have to enter into. Some of it comes from new people that we meet. And in that newness, it is easy for us to say, you know what, that's different than what I like. And so I'm just going to stay in my bubble and not have to experience the change that would have to happen in me to have to engage that. And that's where we get that suffering of having to change ourselves, having to live through that kind of change. Now, at camp, the kids don't get a choice. The food is the food is the food, so you don't have an option of avoiding that once you're there. But then just like those kids who have these struggles emotionally with new people that they're around and these struggles of being homesick, we have plenty of things in our life where we are exposed to new ideas and new people that we don't want to necessarily engage, so we don't have to. We have culturally as a nation sorted ourselves into like-minded communities so that we don't have to encounter people that are different from us. And then when we talk about home, these kids are literally homesick, but we also create spaces of comfort that we don't like to get outside of. We don't want to leave those homes that we create. And even the literal homes we have to leave sometimes as we age and get to those places where we can't stay in the home we're in. Those things can be hard, and we can get to that place of suffering. And it is easy to want to avoid that and stay away from that. And then there's all of the physical suffering that we live with, and that comes in so many different ways. Just turn on the TV and watch the drug commercials for all of the ways we try to avoid that. Some of those drugs are helpful and do wonderful things for us as people, but others of them we use to cover up the real pain that we don't want to feel because we don't want to change and suffer. And when you take all of this avoidance of suffering that we have, you end up in a place then where we haven't developed any endurance and our character has not developed. And then we end up with less than a full hope in what God has put us into this world for. And if you think about our culture today, would you say that we have a strong moral footing these days? No? Nobody's shouting at yes, right? Would you say that we have a strong character and principles that we live by as a group of people? No. Maybe it's because we've been avoiding suffering for so long, which they were doing in Paul's day too. We were avoiding suffering for so long that we're starting to get to a place where we've kind of atrophied, like our character has atrophied, and we don't have that muscle that allows us to live with a good gospel-centered place in the world, to live out the way Jesus called us to live. Now the good news is, God knew that was going to happen. And so we hear in the rest of this text that Jesus came while we were still weak, so while we were avoiding all that suffering, and Jesus came while we were still sinners to die for us. Did he avoid any suffering? Right into it. Right to the cross, to a place of betrayal and denial and beating and death, but then out the other side to do new life. And if you follow that path, right, Jesus goes through suffering and he endures all of that. He already had the character, but then that makes him the hope of the world. And that is the gift that we get in Jesus coming to give us new life. And that journey then is the same for us. When we journey through suffering, which produces, and endurance produces, and character produces, then we end up in a different place when we can live in that path that Jesus calls us to. And this is the other wonderful thing of going to camp, right? You see all of the struggle, but then you get to see what happens when they suffer through and endure, and all of a sudden their character starts to get transformed and they come to this place of hope. Each day we get a couple hours with the kids, and the theme this week was living water. So each day we were talking about bits of baptism and talking about all Bible stories about Jesus at the woman at the well, and Jesus with the man that he sent to the pool to have his eyes opened. On the last day, we came to Psalm 23. Is there any water in Psalm 23? Hopefully you have it open, right? What kind of water is in Psalm 23? Still water. It's water that stills us. It's beside green pastures. It restores our souls. So as we were preparing to spend Friday with them, and after this long, and it is a long week, there's nothing about this that is easy. It's meant to be hard, because suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. So Friday we were going to be in Psalm 23, and we decided that what we wanted to talk about was cups overflowing, which is later in the Psalm. Because all of them, we had seen amazing things happen through the week. And so we wanted to get them together and reflect on the things that had happened to them. And so we sat them down, and I'm going to ask you to do the same thing now. Read the psalm real quick, just look through it. And we put them in groups of 4 big groups of like 9 or 10 kids, and said, what is your favorite part of this psalm? And I want you to guess what you think their favorite part was. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Okay? Any other guesses? There's 4 groups, so there's 4, they could have had 4 different options. Who said that? Yea, though I walk through the valley? All 4 groups picked that part. We put them all together and said, what's your favorite verse in this? And they all said verse 4. When I walk through the darkest valley. I was actually surprised that they all picked that one in this whole week of all this fun stuff we were doing. That's hard, fun stuff. But every single group picked that one, and we said, why? And they all said the same thing. Because God is with us all the time, even when it is hard. So when suffering produces endurance, God is with us in that place, and that produces character, which gives us hope. So after they all picked that, which surprised me a little bit, because I wanted to talk about cups overflowing, and I wanted to talk about anointing, we took them out onto this concrete basketball court that's next to the place where we eat, and we asked them in those groups to make their top 10 list for the week. The top 10 things we did. Now, many of the things that made that list were the events that we did, the hike up to the top of the mountain, the creek walk, the games that they played. And some of the things were surprising. So most of the 4 different groups had similar lists. And one of the things that was on the lists was food. Why was food on the list? Because they're teenagers. That's a good guess. Not all of them loved the food. I will tell you that the one that ate an apple and a salad by the end of the week was wolfing down dinner, because hiking that much will change. No, all of them. The reason they said food, because they got to sit around tables in a community together and continue to build relationship. All of that suffering through the food thing for some of them and eating different things ultimately came down to new community. Now, if that's not suffering producing endurance, which produces character, which produces hope for the future of the world, I'm not sure what is. But then when we went around and we made each of the kids get up and talk about at least one of the things, right, in the whole group. For some of them, just getting up and talking like that at the beginning of the week would have been horrifying, but they all did it without a problem. And one kid stood up and said, you know, I was terrified. Terrified to climb up that ropes course. And he was the one that cried when I went there. He said, but I'm so glad I did it. Because that zip line thing at the end was so much fun, and now I know I can do it. So his favorite thing of the week was the hardest thing of the week for him. He could look back and say the suffering that, he wouldn't say it that way, right? None of them were standing up to say, well, Pastor, the suffering that produced the endurance, which produced the character, gave me great hope. But that's what was unfolding. One of ours had this it was a difficult hike up to the top of the mountain. I mean, there's parts where we were climbing up a rock that on me comes up to here, and some of the kids are only this tall, and so they're trying to get a foot and roll over stuff and get all the way up there. And when we made it up the top and had to come down the storm, I was exhausted. I was emotionally spent, coming down in that rain and hearing the storm come rolling in. And we get done and said, you had a long day. He said, yeah, it was a really hard day. And I said, hardest day of the week. He said, yeah, what was your favorite part? Get to the top. When we got to the top and he looked out and saw this whole valley and the mountains off in the distance, he was just like, wow. Like, wow. Totally worth it. Worth going through all of that suffering. And I could go through the whole week and find example after example of these kids who at the beginning of the week couldn't talk to one another and wouldn't sing when we were singing and were afraid to do this and scared of doing that. And at the end of the week, they are this just bonded group that couldn't hardly, I had to ask them to get in the van 3 times yesterday because they weren't ready to go. Suffering produces endurance, which produces character, which produces hope. That's what Jesus gives us in this transformation that we are given from death into life. And the psalm follows that same arc. It begins with, the Lord is my shepherd. It starts off with still waters and green pastures, but it doesn't stay there. It goes into that dark valley, but then out of that dark valley comes a cup that overflows. So it starts in a still place, it goes through a tough place, but it comes to a new place of hope. The last thing we did for our confirmation time was gather the kids in a circle, and I talked a little bit about anointing, and I talked about what it means to be anointed, which is set apart to serve God by serving the world. And we gathered them in a circle, and I had a little tray of olive oil, and I started it with one of the kids and said, you can mark a little cross on the person next to you. And I sent that around, and they said, what should we say? Because we had done some of it with water earlier in the week, and I had stuff for them to say. I said, you don't have to say anything. And the second person in, she took it, and she looked at her colleague, and she put the cross on her and said, set apart to be sent. I didn't tell them to say anything. That one turned to the next one and said, set apart to be sent. And that one turned to the next one and said, set apart to be sent. The suffering that we go through, which we sometimes try to avoid, leads to endurance, which leads to character, which leads to hope. And it is not hope in what we can do, but hope in what Jesus does through us. And those kids are right. We are set apart to be sent to carry that hope out into the world. And as we finish here, I invite you to grab that Pew Bible. And we're going to read Psalm 23 together. And I want you to, as we read it, think about it as this journey from that place of stillness through that dark place, then to a place of blessing and a cup that is overflowing. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Amen.